12:11 p.m. Helios Aerospace Group's cafeteria is a cathedral of cold ambition. An $8 million H900 jet engine has been stalled for 72 hours, costing $50,000 every minute. Stock prices are hemorrhaging. CEO Miranda Holt, the Iron Widow, strides in, radiating lethal frustration. She spots Noah Carter, a quiet cafeteria worker, clearing trays. Miranda sneers at her elite engineers. "Are your degrees useless? Maybe our lunch boy should try." Laughter erupts, sharp and cruel. Noah stops. He sets down a tray with a haunting thud, meeting her gaze with eyes that have seen the stars. Her empire starts crumbling now. Noah Carter had been working at the Helios cafeteria for exactly 5 years. In that time, he had mastered the complex art of being a ghost in a world of giants. He was the man who kept the coffee hot at 4 a.m., the man who wiped away the grease of 1,000 hurried lunches, and the man who never said a word too many. To the high-flying executives who strode through the halls in three-piece suits, he was merely a component of the facility's background, like the floor tiles or the HVAC system. His life was defined by a strict, quiet routine born of necessity and love. Every morning he woke up at 4:30 a.m. in a modest, two-bedroom apartment that felt far too large without his wife's laughter. He spent his early hours focused entirely on his 10-year-old son, Eli. He flipped golden brown pancakes, quizzed Eli on his science projects, and made sure the boy's backpack was packed with everything a curious mind might need. After walking Eli to the school gates, Noah would put on his blue cafeteria apron and enter the sprawling, high-security world of Helios. He had chosen this life. After his wife, Elena, passed away in a tragic, high-altitude flight accident 5 years ago, Noah had collapsed under the weight of a grief so heavy it threatened to pull him into the earth. He had once been a high-level aerospace engineer, the propulsion prodigy, a man who lived for the cold, beautiful math of the stars. But the pressure of that world, combined with the corporate corruption he discovered, led to the accident, made him crave the shadows. He wanted a job where he didn't have to carry the weight of 1,000 lives on his shoulders. He wanted to be a father first, a protector of the one thing he had left. The cafeteria offered him that, a steady paycheck, no overtime, and the chance to be home when Eli finished school. However, a brilliant mind doesn't simply turn off, it just waits. During his 20-minute lunch breaks, Noah would stand at the far end of the cafeteria balcony, which overlooked the massive, state-of-the-art assembly line. He watched the robotic arms dance. He listened to the low-frequency roar of the testing bays. While others saw machines, Noah saw rhythms. He could hear the music of thermodynamics. He knew the H900 wasn't just a machine. It was a symphony of pressure and heat, and right now, it was playing out of tune. Noah's silence was his armor, but his observation was his weapon. He noticed how the junior engineers looked haggard, their eyes bloodshot from staring at telemetry that didn't make sense. He saw Julian Vance berating a young intern over a decimal point while the real structural flaw sat right in front of them, hidden in the resonance of the turbine blades. Noah had tried to help once, leaving a sticky note on a diagnostic screen during his cleaning shift. It was found by a janitor and thrown away before a single engineer could read the truth written in a cafeteria worker's handwriting. 6 months ago, he noticed a recurring sound in the H900 series, a subtle, high-pitched harmonic whine that shouldn't be there. It wasn't in the blueprints. It was a batch-level error, a ghost in the machine. Driven by a lingering sense of professional duty he couldn't quite kill, Noah had sent a detailed 50-page anonymous technical report to the engineering department. He pointed out the flaw in the fuel injection timing. He even provided the corrective calculus to fix it. He received no response. At Helios, under Miranda Holt's leadership, hierarchy was the only religion. An anonymous suggestion from outside the inner circle was treated as spam, or worse, as an insult. Miranda Holt was a woman who believed in absolute, unyielding power. She was brilliant, yes, but she was also dangerously arrogant, a product of a corporate culture that rewarded results over ethics. To her, a person's value was determined by their title, their pedigree, and the cost of their watch. She had built Helios into a titan by cutting corners and silencing dissenters. The H900 engine was her ultimate gamble to win a $1 trillion government contract. If it passed certification, she would be untouchable. If it failed, she would be a memory. Now that gamble was failing. The engine had stalled during its final high-stress endurance run. For 3 days, the finest PhDs from MIT and Stanford had prodded the $8 million beast with every sensor known to man. They found nothing. The fuel systems checked out. The avionics were green. Yet the engine remained cold. The stock market was reacting with predatory speed. Billions in market cap were vanishing every hour. Miranda needed a scapegoat, someone to humiliate so she could reassert her dominance over her failing team. When she walked into the cafeteria that Tuesday, her eyes landed on Noah. He was quietly stacking trays near the executive table, his back to the room. The air around her seemed to drop several degrees. "You," she said, her voice like a whip crack. "You spend a lot of time watching the bays from up there, don't you, Noah? I see you standing there every day like you're judging us. You probably think you're quite the expert by osmosis. Maybe you think you're smarter than Dr. Vance over there." Noah didn't flinch. He set down a tray and turned to face her. The engineers at the surrounding tables looked up, some with pity, others with the cruel curiosity of people watching a sacrificial lamb. "I just clear the tables, Mrs. Holt," Noah replied, his voice a steady, low baritone that didn't waver. "Oh, don't be modest," Miranda sneered, leaning in close enough for Noah to smell her expensive perfume. "I dare you. If my geniuses are so incompetent, why don't you fix it? I'll give you 10 minutes in the bay. If you can even get it to spark, I'll pay for your son's college and give you a $100,000 bonus. If not, well, maybe you're too distracted for this job too. I'll have security clear your locker by 1 o'clock. The room erupted in laughter, a release of toxic tension at Noah's expense. Noah looked at the faces of the engineers, men who had ignored his warnings and treated him like a shadow for half a decade. Then he looked at Miranda. He felt a spark of something he thought had died with Elena. It wasn't just pride, it was the duty of a man who knew the truth. "I don't need 10 minutes, Noah said, his voice gaining a sudden, resonant strength that seemed to vibrate the very glass of the cafeteria. "I need 5, and I need total access to the procurement logs." The laughter died instantly. The room became so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerators. Noah wasn't a cafeteria worker anymore. He was a man reclaiming his throne. The walk to the technical wing was a gauntlet of mockery and disbelief. Miranda led the way, her high heels clicking a rhythmic death march on the polished concrete. Behind her trailed the board of directors and the elite task force, led by Chief Engineer Julian Vance. Vance was a man whose pride was built on a foundation of degrees and stolen ideas. To him, Noah was a personal insult to the profession. "Don't touch the main shaft, lunch boy," Vance whispered as they entered the sterile, white-tiled bay. "You'll get grease on your apron, and I'd hate for you to have to wash it twice. Just stand there, look at the shiny parts, and tell us why it won't go vroom so we can get back to actual engineering." The H900 sat in the center of the room, a massive crown of titanium, carbon fiber, and secret alloys. It was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, yet it sat dead on its cradle. Diagnostic screens surrounding it were a sea of red, showing thousands of lines of code that led to a dead end. Noah didn't move toward the toolkits. He didn't look at the glowing monitors or the oscillating graphs. He walked slowly around the engine, his hands clasped behind his back. He moved with the quiet familiarity of a man visiting an old friend in the hospital. He stopped at the intake nozzle, closed his eyes, and tilted his head. "What is he doing?" "A seance," a director whispered, checking his Patek Philippe. "This is a circus, Miranda. We have a press conference in 40 minutes. "He's wasting our time," Miranda snapped, her face turning a dangerous shade of pale. 2 minutes gone, Noah. Start scrubbing or start packing. I want this farce over with so I can fire the rest of you." Noah ignored the noise. He was filtering out the human voices, the air conditioning, and the hum of the lights. He was focusing on the metal itself. He remembered the vibrations of the first prototypes he had designed in a desert hangar a decade ago. He knew that metal had a memory. "The alloy isn't expanding correctly," Noah muttered almost to himself. He reached out and touched the casing, feeling the residual heat that shouldn't have been there. You're feeding it too much air because you're terrified of a flameout. But the flameout isn't the problem. The suffocation is. Start the secondary cooling cycle, Noah commanded. It wasn't a request. It was a military order. Vance laughed, a harsh, grating sound. The cooling cycle? The engine is cold, you moron. It's been sitting for 12 hours. You want to freeze the lubricants and snap the seals? That's an $8 million mistake. Start the cycle, Julian, Noah repeated, opening his eyes. His gaze was so piercing that the technician at the console instinctively hit the override before Vance could stop him. The bay filled with a low-frequency whir as the pumps began to circulate liquid nitrogen through the engine's core. The laughter in the room died down as Noah stepped closer, pressing his bare ear against the cold titanium casing. He wasn't worried about the frostbite. He was searching for the ghost, and then he heard it. It was a sound no digital sensor could capture because sensors are programmed to look for spikes, not rhythms. It was a tiny, rhythmic friction, a microscopic tick that occurred only when the fluid pressure reached exactly 42 psi. It was a harmonic imbalance. Give me the maintenance logs from 6 months ago, Noah said, his voice flat and surgical. Specifically, the procurement records for the secondary valve seals in batch 9. Miranda's brow furrowed. Why? Those were all certified by our Tier 1 supplier. We have the papers. The logs, Ms. Holt, Noah said, turning to face her with a look of such absolute certainty that her heart skipped a beat. Reluctantly, Vance pulled up the records on the main projector. Noah's eyes scanned the data with terrifying robotic speed. He wasn't reading, he was recognizing. He saw the entry, a cost optimization swap approved in July. A batch of subpar synthetic components had been used to save a measly $150 per unit. On paper, the specs were within tolerance. In reality, they possessed a different thermal expansion rate than the titanium housing. Open the secondary access panel, Noah said, pointing to a seam near the fuel intake. Absolutely not, Vance barked, stepping into Noah's path. That requires a Class A certification in a clean room environment. If you even scratch that seal, the warranty is void. You're a cafeteria worker. You're out of your league, janitor. Noah stepped so close to Vance that the chief engineer had to back up. Static standards won't save dynamic failures, Julian, Noah said softly. The room went bone-chillingly silent. That phrase, static standards won't save dynamic failures, was the foundational thesis of a legendary classified white paper published 12 years ago that had revolutionized jet propulsion. The paper had been written by the original lead architect of Helios, a man who had vanished after a corporate restructuring. Miranda felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. The joke was dead. She looked at the engine, then at the man in the blue apron. She saw the way he stood, shoulders back, chin high, like a king reclaiming a stolen crown. Open the panel, she ordered, her voice trembling. Let's see how deep this rot goes. The technician used a precision laser cutter to break the security seal. The secondary access panel hissed open like the tomb of a pharaoh, revealing the intricate silver-veined heart of the H900. Noah didn't hesitate. He reached into the dark recesses of the machine, his fingers moving with the grace of a master surgeon. Look at this, Noah said, pulling out a small warped ring of synthetic material. It looked like a cheap toy compared to the surrounding titanium. This is your $150 saving. At high temperatures, it warps by 3 microns, just enough to let a microstream of oxygen into the fuel mix. The sensors see the oxygen, assume there's a leak, and shut down the ignition as a safety protocol. You've been chasing a software ghost for 3 days, but the culprit is a piece of rubber. Vance and his team rushed forward with portable laser scanners. They were checking the numbers, desperate to prove the lunch boy wrong. But as the data streamed onto the monitors, the truth was undeniable. The graphs turned from a stable green to a violent, pulsing red. Noah was right. The engine wasn't just stalled, it was in a state of pre-explosion. If they had attempted one more high-power ignition without this fix, the entire bay, and everyone in it, would have been vaporized in a fireball of titanium shrapnel. "Stop all testing," Miranda whispered, her face the color of ash. But Noah wasn't finished. He reached into a nearby toolkit, grabbed a simple 10 mm hex wrench, a tool so basic it was almost an insult to the millions of dollars of equipment, and made a single quarter-turn adjustment to a secondary locking pin. He then reached over and toggled a manual override on a fuel pump that Vance's team had deemed functional. "Start it up," Noah said. The technician hit the ignition. The H900 didn't just start, it roared. A perfect, steady blue flame erupted from the exhaust nozzle, a pure, crystalline hum that vibrated in the very marrow of their bones. The digital readout stabilized instantly, showing efficiency levels that were theoretically impossible. The unfixable engine was running at 100% capacity. It was a miracle performed by a man in a grease-stained apron. The room was paralyzed in a freeze moment. The board of directors, the engineers, and the most powerful woman in aerospace were all staring at a man who, 10 minutes ago, was scrubbing a soda spill. "Who are you?" Miranda asked, her voice barely a whisper. She stepped down from the observation platform, her eyes searching Noah's face, as if seeing it for the first time. No cafeteria worker knows the metallurgy of a Batch 9 seal. "Who are you?" Noah slowly peeled off his blue apron, dropping it onto the floor like a discarded skin. He stood there in a simple, faded t-shirt, his posture straight and regal. "My name is Noah Carter," he said, and his voice echoed off the white tiles like a judgment. "But 12 years ago, when this company actually cared about engineering, you knew me as the lead architect of the Helios project. I was the one who designed the core architecture you've been cannibalizing for a decade." The first twist hit the room like a physical blow. The older board members began to whisper, their faces pale. Noah wasn't just a worker. He was the ghost of Helios, the genius who had built the company's foundation before being erased from the history books. He had left the industry after a report he wrote about a fatal safety flaw, the one that killed his wife, was suppressed by the board to protect their IPO. But then came the second twist. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted drive. "You thought I was just cleaning tables, Miranda. But every time I mopped your office after hours, I was listening. I know about the shadow ledger accounts. I know you've been funneling the safety test budgets into your personal offshore dividends to artificially inflate the Q3 earnings. I know you personally signed off on the subpar alloys to secure your $50 million bonus." "You're lying," Miranda hissed, though her eyes betrayed her. "You're a cafeteria worker. No one will believe you over me." "It's already done, Miranda," Noah said, pointing to the screens. The telemetry wasn't showing engine data anymore. It was showing a file transfer. "I didn't just fix the engine. I uploaded the logs to the SEC and the FAA the moment the fuel pump hit 100%. The H900 is safe now. But you're grounded." Miranda collapsed into a chair, her empire turning to dust before her eyes. She realized she hadn't brought a jester into her court. She had brought the man who owned the keys to her prison. The betrayal was total. Security alerts began to ping on the directors' phones as Noah's pre-programmed leak reached the authorities. "I didn't do this to destroy you, Miranda," Noah said, walking toward the exit. "I did it because I promised my son that the truth is the only thing that stays in the air. You just happened to be the one standing in the way of the sky." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of fire and ink. Helios Aerospace Group, once the titan of the industry, became a high-profile crime scene. Federal agents swarmed the offices, carrying out boxes of evidence that Noah had meticulously indexed over 5 years of cleaning. Miranda Holt was escorted from the building in handcuffs, her face hidden from the cameras by a simple gray scarf. Her board seat was stripped, her personal assets were frozen, and her reputation was incinerated in a global media firestorm. The company faced billions in fines and a total suspension of its flight certifications. The new interim leadership, a group of frantic executives trying to save the company from bankruptcy, went looking for Noah. They didn't find him at the factory. They found him in a quiet suburban park, pushing Eli on a swing. "Mr. Carter," they pleaded, their voices cracking with desperation. "The company is in ruins. The engines are grounded. We need you. We're offering you the vice presidency of engineering, a $10 million signing bonus, a corner office. Just name your price." Noah didn't even look at the contract. He kept his eyes on his son as Eli giggled, flying through the air. "I don't want the title," Noah said, "and I don't want your money. If you want me to help, you change the process. From the bottom up. Start by making the cafeteria wages livable and give every engineer the right to stop the line if they see a flaw, without fear of being fired." The executives looked at each other, stunned. They were used to negotiating with sharks, not men who found peace in a playground. But they had no choice. They agreed to every term. For the next month, Noah became a phantom in the factory. He didn't sit in the executive suite. He refused to even enter it. He spent his time on the floor with the mechanics and the junior engineers. He rewrote the safety protocols from scratch, introducing dynamic kinetic standards, a system that prioritized human intuition and ear-to-casing diagnostics over the cold, often manipulated data of automated sensors. The culture of fear died with Miranda's departure. It was replaced by a culture of absolute accountability. The engineers stopped looking at their watches and started looking at their torquemine wrenches. They called him Sir with a reverence that bordered on the religious. But Noah always shook his head. "I'm just the guy who noticed a bolt was loose," he would say. One afternoon, he brought Eli to the bay. The H900 was mounted on a static test rig, its core glowing with a steady, healthy light. He showed Eli the complex interplay of gears and gases. "Remember, Eli," he said, "fame and power are like smoke. They look big. They fill a room, but they can't carry a plane. Only the truth has the strength to keep people in the air. Never laugh at anyone, son. You never know who is holding the world together." A month later, the Helios engines were flying safely again. The company had lost its ill-gotten profits, but regained its soul. Miranda Holt's name became a permanent warning in textbooks on corporate ethics, a story of how a single mockery destroyed a multi-billion-dollar empire. At 6 a.m., the cafeteria doors at the Helios complex swung open. The smell of fresh coffee and grilled bacon began to drift through the hallways. A man in a simple blue apron and a baseball cap began to prep the industrial-sized egg stations. It was Noah. His colleagues, the cooks, the dishwashers, the servers, looked at him with a profound, silent respect. They knew he was a millionaire from reclaimed patents and legal settlements. They knew he could have been sitting in a penthouse in Manhattan. But here he was, cracking eggs. "Why are you still here, Noah?" a young intern asked as he grabbed his morning coffee, looking at the man who had become a living legend. "You saved the company. You shouldn't be doing this." Noah smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "I like the coffee here," he said, "and someone needs to make sure the soup isn't too salty. Besides, you learn more by listening to the people than by reading reports in an office." He had refused the big contracts. He stayed a consulting architect with no fixed hours, so he could always walk Eli to school. He chose balance over power and peace over prestige. The company had tried to name the new engine the Carter 1, but he had politely declined, suggesting they name it the Aegis instead, to protect the people inside. The final scene of the story took place on the hood of Noah's old truck, parked at the edge of the airfield. He and Eli sat together, eating sandwiches as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. In the distance, a massive transport jet, powered by 4 H900 engines, lined up on the runway. The engines throttled up, a deep rhythmic thunder that shook the ground. As the plane accelerated and lifted into the twilight sky, its engines glowed with a perfect, steady blue flame. Noah didn't need a monitor to know it was perfect. He could hear it in the wind. It was the sound of a machine that finally had its voice back. Power falls when it ignores the truth. But the truth is the only thing that keeps us soaring. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Kind Single Father.